Hi, everyone. Andrew Farr here, editor of Water Finance and Management, and I have a great guest joining me today, JP Joly, Chief Operating Officer and Director of Customer Success at Waterworth. And JP, you have more than 15 years of experience working with water suppliers, building models, um, providing expertise to local governments on asset management, long-term financial planning, and utility rate setting. You specialize in water conservation planning, drought management, and emergency management planning. So really a wide range of expertise there. So first off, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Yeah, thanks. Great to be with you too, Andrew.
So through our water finance and management publication, I've done several of these videos, these video discussions over the last several months, and we've touched on a range of topics from asset management and some of the things in the realm of your expertise that I just mentioned. And so I do want to dig a little deeper into the financial planning topic today. So I know that's really Waterworth, your business. That's really what you guys are all about. And really, when we talk about financial planning in the water utility sector, it's a topic, financial planning, that's really been discussed, I think, in a slightly different context over the past several months. Of course, referring to the COVID pandemic. Both water and wastewater utilities, there's been a lot of discussion across the industry about how they've lost revenue. Raising rates, it really seems like it's going to be inevitable. Of course, utilities are raising rates quite frequently, but there's a lot of discussion now about how that's going to be done kind of in the short term, the long term, how they're going to continue to balance customer affordability. So maybe that's a good place for us to start with rate setting. How often should utilities, whether we're talking pandemic or not, how often should utilities be looking to raise rates?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's an easy one for me to answer because our business is all more about sort of ongoing rates management than the traditional way that has been done, which has been through rate studies, which are done every 3, maybe 5, sometimes 7 years, sometimes not at all. Not to be too pedantic about it, but rates are the lifeblood of the organization, and we've found too often they are increased, but usually just arbitrarily, just a little bit, just because it's probably the right thing to do, without really having a longer term plan around it. So we encourage our customers through the use of our software, of course, to stay on top of things and to go and make presentations annually, just like they would do their budget, just like they do their audits, have a rate review be an annual exercise. And part of the reason for it is that, and you'd be surprised how a small adjustment to rates for next year can go a long way in helping things even 5 or 10 years from now. So that's the other part of it, which I think you're going to touch on in a moment, is doing rate reviews often, but with a longer term view in mind.
And so, yeah, let's focus on that for a minute. Why do you think it is important to take that long-term view of raising rates?
Yeah, and we're talking about water and wastewater, but this applies equally to all kinds of other infrastructure-based services that municipalities have to deal with. Infrastructure can last a long time, and it's expensive. We know in the water utility industry, a new water tower, a new treatment plant, and those things come up infrequently. Every 30, 40, maybe 50 years, something huge comes along. And so, a lot of municipalities are often faced with the need to do some big infrastructure project, and they hadn't planned for it. And so their options are limited. They maybe don't have the cash they'd like to have to maybe at least cover a portion of the project. So long range planning is all about looking way off into the distance and being prepared for those big things that are coming up.
Yeah. I want to ask you about annual rate maintenance. So you guys, obviously, you have a lot of conversations with, with your customers in the water sector, and you talk to people at utilities who are involved in doing rate maintenance and financial planning. Is annual rate maintenance, is that looked at as something that can be quite time consuming, or is it something that you think can be done, maybe a little bit more efficiently than it is?
Yeah, so we've made it efficient. That's how we've managed to make our business work.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not efficient and it's too tedious and time consuming, then it doesn't get done. And that's just been the way it has been for too long. And rate studies can take months to complete, and they cost $30,000, $50,000, $80,000. So with that kind of a price tag, lots of effort has to go into doing a rate study. But to do just a basic rate maintenance, just to tweak your rates for the next year, just to kind of keep on top of things, doesn't have to take a lot of effort. It's really just looking at revenue requirements over the long term, doing some modeling, and looking at the sensitivity of, well, if you don't increase an extra 0.5%, what does that mean? And just doing that basic analysis will help you to communicate and keep those rates where they need to be. At the end of the day, the politicians want to make things as predictable and keep things as steady as they can for the ratepayers. That's their goal, really.
Sure.
And so their overarching question is, what do we need to do to rates so that things stay steady and are predictable? And in the face of these huge fluctuations in costs, because as we know, some years there's lots of work to be done, other years less. So there's peaks and valleys in the capital spending side of things. But how do you keep rates steady through that? So rates maintenance is the way to do it. Stay on top of it every year. Capital plans shift and move and change. If you keep your model up to date, then it takes very little time to go back in there and just see, oh, let's see what we need to do for this year for a rate increase, just to keep on track for this long-term sustainability. So it doesn't have to take a lot of time if you keep on top of it. If you maintain a model, then that model is always ready for you to answer your questions when you have them.
Sure. The final point that I wanted to cover with you is about communication. I think we can talk about communication from a number of aspects when we talk about water, wastewater, utility management. There's communication between the utility and the public. There's internal communication between various stakeholders at a utility. One example that comes to mind is with a lot of new technologies that utilities are implementing. We cover a lot of stories on AMI and metering upgrades, and it's important to communicate how this is a good investment for the utility. It's important to communicate this with the public, but also internally. How is this going to affect cost savings going forward? So from your perspective, again, when we talk about some of these important decisions that the finance people, within a utility are dealing with, raising rates, et cetera. Talk about how important communication is amongst kind of all the stakeholders involved, because you mentioned politicians earlier, and the mayor of a city, for example, they're involved quite a bit in that too, because it obviously they come under public scrutiny if there's issues. So talk a little bit about communication and what you see as kind of the important aspects there.
Yeah, and that's a big topic, and I could, you and I could be talking about that for a long time. But let me just see if I can reach out for some of the highlights around that. And it really is, at the end of the day, about communication. Running a utility is a complex endeavor, and the trick to it all is to bring just those relevant points forward, communicate those and insulate the politicians and the ratepayers from all the details. Those details should be accessible if somebody wants to dig deeper. But communicating, the traditional way has been to develop a report. Okay, let's go back to the rate study. If I'm a consultant, and I have been one, and I'm going to do a rate study for you, I'm going to charge you $50,000 maybe to do a water and wastewater rate study. Well, I better give you at least an 80-page report for that kind of a price tag. And those reports are really hard to read. They're not really a communications tool. I mean, they're an source of information, but they're not really communicating. What we've done is and again through our software, our tool is dynamic. So what happens is when you change some values or change some assumptions, the whole picture shifts and moves right before your eyes. And we've found that is the trick to it all, because politicians, a lot of times I'll go to a council meeting and say, here's the answer, or maybe there'll be two options. Here's option one and option two. And politicians invariably want to explore further than just those two options. And they don't usually have the ability to do that. They might say, well, can you come back next council meeting with an option three? And, 6 weeks has to elapse before the next council meeting, and that can happen. With today's software tools, we have the ability now to do some live modeling with our elected officials and have them ask their questions right in the middle of a meeting and show them this is what happens if you don't give us, we're asking for a 3% rate increase. If you're only going to give us 2%, look what happens in 5 years. Yeah. And they immediately see that on the screen. They see that their cash is going to, falter, and then they'll be in a less good position 5 years from now. And in matters of seconds, it really helps focus their decision-making process. So the trick to it that we've seen is this dynamic modeling, really helping these elected officials explore the possibilities so that they can hone in on what the right decision is. Yeah. And that's just one piece of it. There's as you said, there's internal communications, communicating with the public. There's all variations on that, but let's tell stories using pictures. Let's stop producing big, thick reports full of tables and numbers and hard to read paragraphs of text. That's kind of our philosophy. Yeah. One of my customers told me just the other day, he said, your tool is not a rates management software tool, it's a communication tool. And it really kind of got me thinking about that. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, JP, I think that's probably a good place to leave it. I will say, as you alluded to earlier, managing a water utility is a pretty in-depth endeavor. There's lots of different components to it. And I think when we look at utility challenges, you look at annual AWWA State of the Industry reports and things like that. Financing is always the big issue that everything comes down to. It's always a challenge. It's been a challenge for years and years. There's underinvestment, I think, in the market. Everybody would agree, or I think most people would agree, at least in the industry, with that. So it's good to hear more people such as yourself kind of talking about this and trying to make things in the financial planning realm a bit easier. So JP, Chief Operating Officer and Director of Customer Success at Waterworth. JP, thanks for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks, Andrew. It's been a pleasure for me too. Have a good day.
Thanks.